Hey, it's Soul with another video. We're talking game design once again, and if you haven't already, I suggest you check out my piece on normalizing gear progression because that ties pretty heavily into what I'm about to say. Today, I want to talk about expansion features, the gimmicks, the sort of over-the-top systems that Blizzard brings to an expansion with a core philosophy in mind that it's not gonna make it to the next expansion in one piece. The leveling perks from Warlords of Draenor, they didn't. Neither did Artifact Weapons, Legion Legendaries, or the Netherlight Crucible. And it's all but certain that Azeroth and Corruption will not either. The feeling of loss has been jarring, to say the least, asserting that the World of Warcraft is the kind of MMO where you can miss out on stuff. Whether it was fun or not is up to each of us, but the FOMO is real, and it leaves a not-so-fun taste in your mouth. I've talked a lot about how Blizzard can move away from expansion features that join our characters at the hip, so I invite you to take a look at all the different ideas that I've come up with over the years. Today, though, is gonna be a little different. I'm going to look for not a departure, but a compromise that delivers on the following premise. That instead of the funk from losing things as we jump from one expansion to the next, we slide over instead. This is going to need some explaining to prepare you for what I'm proposing, and I came up with this idea sort of hastily, but I encourage you to please hear me out. Let's first talk essences. Azeroth essences can be separated into two uneven halves. The half where you have to obtain and power them up, and then the half where you use them, the actual agency of playing with them and working out what's best for your class or your spec. If we focus on the good half, using them, essences were a pretty good system. From the vibe that I get around the WoW space, I think I'm right. But let me be super clear, I'm not talking about the farming that's needed to get them, whether it's one time or so many times for each of your alts. Just this part, the playing around of abilities and passives, figuring out the best build for a particular boss, an encounter, or a PvP situation. For something that Blizzard had to cook up pretty quickly in response to how poorly received the original Azeroth system was, I gotta hand it to them. It's a pretty deep feature, with a very strong story theme using Azeroth, the lifeblood of a Titan. It delivered a mix of abilities and class-altering enhancements that I want to point out was not perfectly executed, like the focusing iris was an overpowered door that could not be closed, and I would have liked some more class-specific essences that gave a more intimate feel, not unlike artifact weapons, traits, or legendaries. But this introduction ends with this straightforward opinion. Essences are one of the better features that Blizzard has ever delivered. I'm clearly gushing over essences a little bit, but we can't deny its simplicity or its effectiveness. This is it. A major slot for a major perk, with 3 satellites for minor supplementary versions of each respective perk. This is a feature with hard boundaries, 4 total slots for 4 total choices. And outside of having icy veins tell you how to be good, the game is to figure out the combination that works best for you. Here's an interesting thought to consider. What if corruption was introduced in the same way? So let's toss out all these essences on the right-hand side and replace them with the many corruption affixes and levels that we have right now. So if we wanted Twilight Devastation, because of course everybody wants Twilight Devastation, we would dump it into the center slot. But consider this, there are 3 levels of Twilight Devastation. Also consider that each level would take up one of these nodes. So now considering that, we have some decisions to make. We want a level 3 TD, which means it's going to take up 3 of the 4 available slots, but you know what? We really want that level 2 Effable Truth trait, because that's just really awesome for your class or spec, so what do? Well, you decide to just slot in a level 2 Twilight Devastation instead, and then you throw in the Effable Truth. In today's WoW, corruption isn't bound to a rigid slot system like this though. We have a theme, we have a gimmick that allows us to break boundaries but with personal risk. That's something that I would argue is also a really neat and fun concept, and I'm also glad that it's only happening in this patch. So now let's circle back to the original essence system and talk a little bit about how we obtained said essences. We all feel a little bit different about this, but within many circles, it's agreed that it's a pain in the ass to jump through one content hoop after another to acquire and level up each essence, and it's made worse for each and every alt that comes afterwards. So now, let's take all of these old requirements, having to run mythic pluses or farming old raids and suffering through long-ass battleground queues, and throw all that stuff out the window, alright? Wipe it from your brain. Suspend your disbelief a little bit more, and assume that these essences were an original feature in Battle for Azeroth. Now, what if we could obtain a handful, maybe even a good chunk of these essences from just leveling? From just completing the zone storylines and the war campaign? And then what if in patch 8.1, completing the campaign before Dazara lore gave you a few more essences? And then in 8.2, completing the Nazjatar campaign dropped some new essences, and then it bumped all of your existing essences to level 2. And then, after completing the 8.3 intro, more new essences, and then you're bumped up to level 3. And that progression was all account bound. Would that be cool? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe the cynic in you refuses to get excited at such a theory. You're just stuck, feeling like,
oh god, there is no way that Blizzard would do such a thing because they must, ActiBliz must force us on these intense grinds and RNG.
like you have Stockholm Syndrome, something like that. But it makes essences obviously more accessible. And each season would alter the meta just a little bit as we're introduced to new and more powerful versions of these essences with these added perks. But of course, what would happen at the end of the expansion? We fully expect an unceremonious dump of the previous system. This or that button won't work any longer. The random procs and utilities are gone. The extra PvP talent that you had, it's deactivated. We'll be left with characters that feel like fractions of themselves as we pick ourselves back up and take up the next gimmicky feature. Like I said, this video isn't meant to entirely solve that problem, but at least make the transition a little bit easier. What if things could be just a little bit different? Remember in our pretend scenario, I said that you would earn a bunch of essences from just leveling and doing the main story. What if the same thing happened in the next expansion? So as you quested, new essences specific to the theme of this new expansion would replace your old ones. The dropping of the old system would still feel bad, don't get me wrong, but you'd immediately pick up a few new toys to help fill that gap. And then as you level up, a nice selection of perks and other things to play with become yours. And now we're finally getting to what I'm proposing, a new approach to how expansion features are built and presented, with a clear divide between player power and roleplay, aka, cosmetic rewards and just extra stuff. What we've been talking about is this, the first half, this expansion feature UI that's focused on awesome, fun, or powerful things that tie into the expansion's theme to deliver a lot of flash and flavor, along with, some throughput and deeps. The framework right here never changes. In this example, and let me be clear, this is just an example based on a structure that we're familiar with. So it's a series of selections of different levels that you can slot to customize your character to be either super focused if you want to put 4 of the same thing in all slots, or if you want to be versatile, you want to take a level 1 trait or power and slot it into each thing, or some sort of combination of both. These perks are unlocked through story and leveling, and then upgrades are available through questing in later patches, which I would argue is the most forgiving grind of them all. But it's account-wide anyway, because the design focus isn't to get you to grind to become viable or powerful, it's to grind for the things that you actually want, with this power that you've obtained a little bit easier. Since the framework doesn't change, the expectations are set in the minds of players that as one story ends, another begins. The perks we had go away, only to be replaced by a new set of starting perks very quickly into the new content. It's less like arriving at a foreign country and more like turning a page. Now you might be wondering, okay, so what kinds of perks or abilities or traits or whatever, what are we talking about here? It's difficult, it's impossible for me to get into specifics because at the very least, this particular vision of perks and slots might not be ideal. It might look totally different. There might be a lot more slots or a lot more selections or some sort of combination on that. The second half of the expansion feature it's really up to your imagination. Using previous expansions, this second half could be the Order Hall and all of its cosmetic rewards. Maybe it's something like the Garrison, but without the overpowered quality of life features. In Shadowlands, we're going to be given hints of this Covenant Sanctum to restore, and Soulbinds, which will cover all sorts of cosmetics and perks and more. And of course, there's the like of Horrific Visions and Torghast to deliver solo and group challenge. It's here where we can identify things that are more grindy, whether it's clearing hard content, RNG drops, reputation farming, crafting, or sending followers off to missions, whatever. It's basically everything else in the expansion that isn't critical to player power. And it's where Blizzard can go completely off the rails if they like. So what's the point of this kind of ridiculous exercise? This is meant to complement an earlier video that I made to redo gear progression in such a way that it's entirely separated from expansion features, all for the sake of one core philosophy, which is to deliver game systems that are easy to understand. It's much easier to understand upgrading gear than to wrangle with corruption resistance and random item level or socket bonuses. It would feel familiar to jump back into WoW after a long break, and know that there are expansion perks that you expect, and that they can be easily picked up. From there, it's about the rest of the expansion content. Is it fun? Is Torghast fun? Are Covenants going to be worth working on? I'm not really suggesting these ideas as a must-have for WoW, but to just get your gears going as to what could be some system changes or additions that could come to the game that aren't just part of a gimmick, but a real foundation for future iterations. Or maybe I'm just talking out of my ass, but I would love to read what you have to say too. So leave a comment. Don't forget to like this piece, and if you enjoyed yourself, subscribe for more of this and all things Warcraft. We'll see you next time. Until then, stay safe, stay happy, and stay breezy.